The scourge of mendacity. I keep hearing how committed people are to finding and understanding reality, how they want the truth, want falsehoods corrected, and are dedicated to changing troublesome aspects revealed. However, the reality as it is commonly viewed, and even more as it continues to be commonly materialized, seems to squarely contradict these ambitions, or at least their successful implementation. The world seems to be caught in a dense web of persistently spun and intermeshing misrepresentations of present, past, and future. These misrepresentations encompass not only express misstatements of fact but also heavily rely on omissions of fact. They further include the guiding of attention to make people ignore or discount certain facts or sources of facts and concentrate on others. Such tactics are not only geared to influence perceptive and rational processes, but heavily rely on influencing emotional dispositions to ultimately subject victims to controlled conduct. Perpetrators of misrepresentation are numerous, and they mostly do not seem explicitly coordinated. Many may deviate from others in their views and conduct. Still, together and overall, they convey manipulative influences that generally keep societies functioning in prescribed ways, in scripted evolutions and revolutions, that fall significantly short of the potential for human happiness we can imagine. Many may blame conspiracies by dark forces for such conditions. They may point to more or less clandestine powers trying to impose a worldview in their favor. Such powers are often described as religious or ancient leadership castes, or more recently arrived financiers of industry and governments whose persons, or at least activities, are removed from public notoriety and even public notice. Some theories go so far as to blame superhuman or alien forces. A more common strain of attributing responsibility focuses on the interchange between corporate and political powers to shape and subvert the supremacy of public will in the arrangement of a commonwealth's affairs for corrupt purposes. Individuals conclude that such elite powers must exist and wield enormous influence because the cumulative power of individuals seems to have little effect on larger situations and developments in societies. Whoever the ultimate powers running the world are believed to be, their concealed exercise of power invites fear, revulsion, suspicion, and a feeling of helplessness. It is widely assumed that they are trying to exploit humanity for selfish purposes, whatever they may define these to be. Recollections of unchecked rule by despots throughout history arise from these impressions. The hard-fought victories over such barbaric conditions appear to be in great peril, although the methods of subjection and abuse seem to have changed. Surreptitious elites are accused of applying stealthy manipulations rather than blunt instruments of physical force or its threat that were prevalent in the past. Even where physical enforcement of their power is pursued, they are said to manipulate individuals and groups into undertaking such work for them. Hence, the primary tool of elite power is deemed to be nonviolent manipulation. Much of this manipulation may seem to be open in the form of lopsided exchanges or along the lines of extortion. The powerful may create or appropriate facts that place victims in circumstances forcing them to preserve or obtain desired benefits by behaving as directed. The decision points, choices, and consequences of agreeing or not agreeing in such situations may be rather clear to the victims. Victims may back down and align in circumstantial confrontations because they face disadvantages upon their opposition and possibly lapses into direct domination. Although circumstantial tactics may appear indirect, their material context can approximate direct physical coercion or threat of coercion. In the past, these tactics were frequently combined. But direct as well as indirect mistreatment of victims to manipulate their behavior has been getting rarer because it carries the mark of obvious exploitation and thus is never far from the risk of resistance and destructive clashes. Dominating elites are naturally interested in lowering that risk to secure their position and resulting activities. Mental manipulation of which victims are unaware can grant such a risk reduction. It can influence individuals' minds in ways that neutralize their independent considerations to keep them at bay or take advantage of them by inducing compliant activities. It may take the shape of implanting mindsets, but also in fostering a lack of orientation that makes victims susceptible to offers of guidance. These tactics are in principle not new. They have been regularly applied together with direct and indirect coercion and have often enabled or strengthened these. The governance of physical conditions may constitute the basis for elites' physical wealth, position, and capabilities. However, societal developments and the development of sophisticated techniques have brought mendacious mental influence to the foreground, to where it has become the most important manner in which elites control a populace. Direct physical enforcement may still be kept alive as an option of last resort, and indirect physical enforcement by factual circumstances of victims' existence may still constitute an important factor in motivating victims, but such enforcement potentials or pressure points may be effectively concealed and replaced by a layer of voluntariness induced by manipulated mental disposition. Arguably, exposing such concealed manipulations by laying out their sources, objectives, methods, and results should do some good. Victims should react with outrage to discovering that they have been systematically deceived and used for corrupt purposes of others. They should try to put a stop to such schemes, or at least not fall for them anymore. However, this is not what one can observe, except for a few marginalized attempts. Upon disclosures of spectacular manipulative practices, there may be declarations of distress and of intent to change the game on the part of both victims and individuals and groups held responsible. And yet, looking back at such occurrences, very little is ever done to remedy the exposed problems besides window dressing. Their damaging causes and consequences are swiftly forgotten to a point where they no longer impart sufficient motivation for change. Beyond that, less spectacular manipulative practices that do not give rise to extraordinary blow-ups are regularly endured even after they are recognized and become widely known. They may keep receiving lip service about their insidious nature, and they may be weakened within the narrow scope in which they gained notoriety. But awareness of manipulatory practices usually does little to reduce their general application or efficacy. Victims generally keep taking manipulatory abuse even though there is no shortage of well-evidenced information about schemes, and they are repeatedly alerted to instances of such schemes. This apathy begs for an explanation. Much is being made of insidious mental effects of manipulative techniques. They are held responsible for shaping or preempting the minds of victims to where they cannot tell truth from a lie, reality from a mirage, their own from an imposed mentality, and are incapable of formulating sufficiently independent considerations or motivations. Indeed, evidence abounds that powerful influences can be applied to mentally manipulate individuals, so they will not recognize or will not oppose these or other manipulations. A sizable portion of the populace may be swayed because individuals' minds are functioning at low levels that render them uncritical and suggestible by nature. The cumulative and correlated effects of mendacious manipulative influences may be sufficient to overwhelm and program their mental faculties. Such individuals may also be misled by the purported authority and vast spread of a related artificial reality to presume its validity. They may lack sufficient mental powers or insight to notice slip-ups or contradictions or to pursue critical questioning. Still, brainwashing techniques on the susceptible alone do not suffice to explain the overwhelming scope in which individuals succumb to deleterious influences and why they would not effectively react even after these are exposed. There are plenty of individuals with mental acuities and thereby enabled levels of education and that make them substantially resistant to outright mind control. Personal experiences and experiences by others conveyed through the broad facilities of modern information sharing put most individuals on notice that not all they are asked to believe is in fact so. With the flood of available information pointing out sources, objectives, mechanics, and consequences of manipulative practices, one cannot claim a lack of deeper indication. Upon further inquiry, victims can discover major discrepancies between popularized and actual situations and events. Nor does there appear to be a lack of incentive to acquire such information. Individuals can't be happy with being manipulated like pawns. Regular abuses in favor of controlling forces as well as recurring occasions in which manipulatory practices lead to exceptionally disastrous results, should wake them up and lead to a groundswell of opposition. Considering the pervasive character of disadvantagement and general awareness of being manipulated, it is hard to believe that manipulations are so strong that questions of doubt could not rise to an actionable or at least more inquisitive level in victims' minds. To gain an almost complete general compliance with manipulatory objectives, aligning motivations by individuals must be at play. One might suspect that such motivations spring from the insecurities of subjects about strategies that best serve their happiness and about what happiness means for them. These insecurities may render individuals susceptible to all kinds of influences. However, why would intelligent individuals choose to align themselves with forces that are proven or suspected to seek such alignment for exploitatory purposes? Even a cursory review of manipulative schemes should make anybody who is alert enough recoil from subscribing to them as a personal philosophy. Hence, it is not credible to assert that mentally capable victims would subscribe to corrupt practices as an ideal manner of pursuing their happiness. This leaves the possibility that such victims align themselves even though they regard an alignment as less than ideal. Such a mindset may be easy to understand in instances where the might of entrenched manipulative systems seems too impenetrable and the risk too great for individuals who dare to oppose such a regime. However, modern manipulative systems regularly operate under a cover of substantial liberties, including the ability to elect representatives. Such systems evidence that even without manifest coaxing or pressure, a broad range of individuals can be held in compliance as long as their existence remains bearable. What that means and what would constitute a degradation at which individuals would cease to cooperate may be represented by a range of opinions and may vary in different societies. In any event, such a standard serves as an incentive for corrupt regimes to maintain the existential circumstances of victims within a range that induces compliance. Still, victims' decisions to participate remain autonomous responses to offered circumstances. Those autonomous concurrences are bound to rise as individuals make a better living and life in a manipulative system. They may decide to play along and even become active supporters of such a system as long as they see more value in doing so than in opposing the system. They may behave as if brainwashing had worked on them or even become functionaries of brainwashing applied to weaker-minded portions of the populace. Knowing the corrupt nature of the system and at least suspecting that the freedoms it grants and ideals it advertises form a mere veneer over its true nature, such victims may not ask for anything that would fundamentally oppose the intent of the system. They may not harbor idealistic dreams of optimized freedom, of actualizing implements of perfunctory popular power, or of revising the system in any other major way. Their interests may be predominantly materialistic and focus on being left alone by the system as long as they leave the system to its devices. The fact that powerful forces need help in controlling subjects and putting them to work for them also raises in subjects the thought of profiting and advancing through the ranks as agents. With such attitudes by manipulative victims, it becomes difficult to see them much as victims rather than accomplices. Not all the fault for unnecessarily unhappy circumstances lies with dominant manipulative schemes and those imposing them. A sizable, and in a liberal system arguably overwhelming, portion of responsibility lies with victims who in spite of awareness of a system's shortcomings comply. Their informed participation makes them supporters of manipulatory systems without whom these might not be able to exist. In fact, it may be hard to discern whether collaborating individuals fit into a system imposed on them or whether they or their predecessors enabled or even fostered an exploitative system into which they more or less willingly fit. Opportunism alone cannot fully explain why individuals would condone being lied to and taken advantage of and not attempt to change such conditions even when they have a good opportunity at succeeding. Beyond a mere calculation of collaborative benefit, motivators for autonomous collaborative behavior are very basic, ancient tribal and hierarchic instincts. Because these almost invariably occur together, interact, and partly overlap, we will look at them in conjunction. Among their expressions are the desires to be accepted, cared for, care in turn for others, and to do well by becoming a valuable member of a group. In the initial individual stage of such instincts, we seek the security of being included in treatment afforded among tribal members with particular indulgence of our defenseless and growing status. Soon thereafter, we seek to assume a position as full member of a tribe and to satisfy our drive to benefit our tribe. We undertake both by constructive contributions through functional integration. We seek at a minimum respect for an equal standing. However, we instinctively seek more once we have secured such standing and only regard equality as a starting and fallback position. We want to experience various benefits that flow from an elevated standing. This makes us work on distancing ourselves from others in constructive, but also destructive and divisive ways. This hierarchic instinct easily incentivizes physical domination and manipulation that leads to contention with other members of a tribe and harms tribal unity. Such behavior calls for excuses, legitimizations, and obfuscation. Perpetrators and victims also look to repair damage by common undertakings and particularly by uniting against external foes. Profiling against forces outside the tribe may not only create a valve for internal ambitions but may serve them by distinctions of individual valor. In addition, individuals want to be part of a powerful tribe for a number of legitimate reasons. Yet, this also tempts them to serve their tribe by damaging those outside its confines. This exclusive tribal attitude can become particularly powerful because it may combine with an equidirectional hierarchic attitude that seeks to obtain advantages as part of a tribe over humans outside the tribe. Here again, contention with other tribes seems to be programmed. In conformance with their tribal identification and wishes, members tend to be similarly uncritical as they are toward their individual overreaching. This tendency corresponds to a general selfish trait in the human mind that seeks fulfillment of needs at the cost of others and seeks to avoid the pain of remorse or restraint by denying and concealing fault in oneself. Such inclinations receive opposition from other rational and emotional considerations and impulses. Unfolding the panoply of competing motivations and their sources would lead us astray at this point. I address them in more detail in my book Philosophy of Happiness. For purposes of our discussion here, it suffices to acknowledge that at the core of individual and tribal domination stands the desire of individuals to feel good about themselves and their tribe. This desire finds expression in various needs. Some of these needs focus on solidarity and cooperation while others seek superior distinction and competition. But none of these needs are purely ethereal. They involve the shared or preferential allocation of material resources. Positive, yet also grave negative, implications for humanity are palpable. We may easily recognize that giving in to our primitive inclinations toward competition is bound to create continual contest, upheaval, strife, and warfare among individuals and groups, interfere with many of our needs, and cause damage up to raising existential threats. Nevertheless, regardless of what our mind might tell us upon contemplation and regardless of how much we may be subjected to contemplations by others in denouncement of such inclinations, powerful parts of us keep searching for superiority and related advantages. We do that not only because we cannot help ourselves, but also because we know that contests are followed by periods in which we may be rewarded for winning without having to continuously fight for and defend our advantages. Tribal and hierarchic instincts not only entail aggression to gain and keep superiority. They also include complementary drives by those proven inferior to submit and fit into arrangements that reward superiority, and with it motivations and undertakings to obtain it. From the standpoint of inferior individuals and groups, this may be justified by trying to stop the aggression by superior forces and partake in their superiority by catering to it. This in turn incentivizes superior forces to relent at some point and enjoy the fruits of their aggression. Arguably, there is some justification for such instincts and their results in archaic, human existence by identifying and advancing the strongest and smartest specimens or providing the most capable leadership and organization in a hostile environment. Such potential advantages have long been passed by the damage inflicted by competition, and the benefits of cooperation. And yet old competitive instincts are hard to overcome in the human psyche and conduct. Manipulative forces shamelessly take advantage of these outdated human weaknesses, and their instinctive motivators. These forces and their motivations arise, grow, and persist from these primitive origins. By organizing systems they rule according to resulting principles, and having victims act by them as well, they legitimize their rule. Particularly as a society moves away from openly coercive organization, its attachment to archaic principles of societal interaction can only persist because victims are still willing to give in to them. Hence, some of the most primitive sentiments keep members of a society out of contention to change their subjection to the interests of others. Added advantages that arise from the application of such principles for some victims upon their application to other victims, as agents of elites or as independent actors, may additionally legitimize such surrender. Either way, a sizable grouping of subjects may become collaborators by rational and emotional conviction. Together with the group of weak-minded individuals who are intimidated or duped into support, or at least compliance despite their disadvantagement, this may create a relatively stable basis for exploitatory regimes. The potential for the stability of such regimes has also increased due to their growing sophistication. For eons, the founding and maintaining of power by openly physical means continue to be interrupted by successive contests among the powerful and between the powerful and their victims that brought violence, fear, and destruction among and within systems. More recently, societies have advanced to more restricted contests and less risk-laden and costly existences in which physical clashes have been reduced or avoided. We may call this stage of cultural consensus more civilized compared to the prior stage. Still, while the methods have changed, the motivations of gaining and cementing superiority and connected objectives remain similar. Open physical domination is only slightly removed and at times considered a reasonable fallback strategy if mendacious manipulation does not yield the expected results. Horrific as physical domination might be or become, its largely open and plain aggression has been replaced by devious and cowardly practices, centered around misrepresentations that may appear to many as even more contemptible. Both types of contests have been with us for some time. But physical contest appears to be truer to the types of tribal and hierarchic competitions we still witness more purely in other species. Deception requires cunning qualities that were only possible with higher mental development. Direct physical coercion is becoming increasingly difficult to cover by mendacity within a society. Even the application or threat of violence toward other societies has undergone rising societal opposition despite attempted mendacious manipulations. Misrepresentations may be far more adept in veiling or justifying indirect circumstances that coerce victims into compliance. While some detrimental consequences of tribal and hierarchic systems have been curbed in consequence of the less physical nature of practices, and have been mellowed to secure the continued collaboration of victims, negative consequences for victims still abound and have been solidified. Living in a world permeated by deceit must fill even those perpetrating it with fundamental disgust about its counterfeit mockery parading as reality. They are caught in its web as well and must play insincere roles to prevail. Complying with the rules and parameters of a system governed by lies must fill masters and aware subjects with dread of inauthenticity. It denies oneself and others the joy of a self-determined life in reality. All the advantages members may be able to garner in devising or collaborating with a corrupt system and all arguments in its favor cannot extinguish the fact that they are not living free, that they are living lies. Powerful forces may save their lack of self-respect and contempt for a fake system by ideas that they serve real and deserving ulterior purposes. This becomes more difficult for subjects of mendacious strategies who do not partake in such purported insights. Even if they would share such insights, and would apply the same or similar tactics and impose the same or similar limitations to which they are subjected if they had sufficient power, they must admit that being on the receiving end of domination damages them overproportionally. Most subjects of a corrupt system must realize that they will never be compensated for their suffering by advancing to where they can take sufficient advantage of exploitatory circumstances. Even agency for powerful interests may not offer such conditions for most. Identifying and agreeing with possible underlying ideals of manipulators may not help much either, because subjection to strategies of deceit to serve these ideals must evoke offense and suspicion. The weakening of rationalizations seems to be led by the flagging of attachments to tribal and hierarchic instincts. A distancing from violence is only the most notable sign regarding the decline of these instincts. Any form of abuse, even misrepresentation, may be increasingly difficult to cover or justify by reliance on these instincts. Resulting allegiances seem to wane even as manipulatory forces exert extensive efforts to keep them alive and strengthen them. A number of reasons to be found in the advancement of technology and human consciousness have contributed to that development. And yet, the system may be so ubiquitous and victims may have adapted their life so much to it that they may find it difficult to imagine a truthful setting free from domination by manipulatory interests and how they could arrive there. Victims may believe they have no chance of escape and little chance of establishing a better replacement. They may therefore set themselves to make the best of their situation. This sentiment may mix with appreciation of systemic benefits and fear of repercussions upon deviation from systematic norms. In weak-minded individuals, such attitudes may easily supplement their lack of consideration and stronger than average instinctive influences to keep them committed. More advanced individuals may find this more challenging. To keep up their collaboration with the necessary energy and enthusiasm to succeed, and to not despair from their inability to live the life they want, or where subjects of corrupt systems have to lie to themselves. They must talk themselves into, if not believing, at least accepting the systemic lies as a continuing part of their world. To justify choices that go against their true sentiments or wishes, they invent a persona and a view of themselves and their surroundings in compliance with a role they decide to play. They try to convince themselves and others that they are not being manipulated and that they are choosing a collaborative life by their free will. They claim that they would have chosen the system and their participation in it even if they had free hand to devise a system, and define their function in it. This may be necessary to advance into higher positions of agency for the ruling forces. It may also be necessary to function in such positions. To overcome external and internal scruples, some may overcompensate for the doubts and objections they carry and become staunch supporters, deniers, and apologists for a corrupt system, buying into its lies. They may brainwash themselves into compliance. But active identification may be an extreme attitude not shared by many collaborators. Most seem to be determined to remain generally supportive but willfully ignorant or at least oblivious to the manipulatory system they inhabit and serve. They dismiss information putting them on notice about efforts to manipulate them and reject even minimal efforts to find out more. They do not want to investigate or even listen to anything that would lead them to seriously question their mendacious settings and collaboration. Such individuals will usually claim they would oppose manipulation if it existed but reject the notion they are co-opted by it. They will assert being perfectly independent and able to evaluate their life and circumstances. Still, members of this group may try to dismiss their misgivings, forget their pain by diverse distractions and suppressions to bring themselves to a level of uncomplicated acceptance proffered by the weak of mind. A relatively small group of collaborators may require more to live with themselves than denial and diffusion. They may discuss or listen to descriptions of manipulations with various degrees of interest and outrage. Some may favor or support individuals or organizations that are critical of and attempt to uncover and oppose victimizations by the powerful. Some collaborators may even participate to some extent in such efforts until they feel they have done enough not to feel hypocritical. And yet they may remain generally in league with a manipulatory system because they believe that the benefits from such a system outweigh its downsides or the downsides of possible alternatives, at least for them. Thus, rather than seeking a system in which happiness can be optimized, most humans arrange themselves with an exploitatory system, and strive to optimize their happiness within its permitted confines. Even if they do not fall prey to the express propaganda of the powerful trying to define happiness for them, the suspicion that they would not succeed in trying to define their true self and true ideals or incur unproductive pain in their realization may have them commit to an unreconciled pragmatism. They may cope to the best of their abilities within given precepts as they encounter challenges. Such reactions favor behavior guided by immediate objectives and means and unreconciled instincts, among them unconsidered tribal and hierarchic instincts. Subjects in various states of disposition may regard their reactions as true personal expressions. However, at this unconsidered level, external manipulation can influence minds rather easily and with particular efficacy because they do not sufficiently consider what forces steer their perceptions, thoughts, emotions and conduct and whether these serve their interest. It would seem then that powerful elements can wield impressive amounts of manipulation over members of a modern society. However, the mendacity permeating such societies is not solely due to the interaction between dominating elements at the top and reactive subjects upon which they apply their deceit. Individual members and groups are capable of manipulation and generally not any less inclined to use it on one another. The only elements missing in their applications may be opportunity and at times sophistication and means of setup or dispersion of evidence. Individuals may struggle to obtain equality with others and not be currently of a mind to consider domination an option. Further, the monopoly on direct physical domination and even some indirect means of domination by elites forecloses violence or its threat and some measures of circumstantial coercion as effective means or even potentials to get one's way. This leaves influence through misrepresentations as the prevalent means of manipulation among individuals. With less power to exert domination, it is much easier to appear more virtuous. Most of us, maybe none of us, are any better than the dark forces we blame. This is the world in which most of us live, a world for which most of us are responsible, and which is fully deserved by a great majority of subjects who do nothing to improve it. In fact, most individuals do not wish to ban the principle of dominating others to reach one's objectives because they embrace or want to have the freedom to apply it. They may regard this principle as essential to move their interests ahead of others. Societies permeated with this principle make the ultimate dominating forces only the most successful among many, envied rather than loathed. Even if their practice is surface, those who would apply them if they had the power or who apply them currently on a more limited level hardly possess the authority to criticize them. Dominating regimes understand this immunizing effect. The fact that a corrupt system demands and endorses the practice of tribal and hierarchic instincts shared by all humans in their negative aspects leaves or places these instincts in the foreground of subjects' understanding of their surroundings and themselves and moves other instincts into the background. Even if tribal and hierarchic instincts decline, they may remain formidable for quite some time because of their deep anchoring in human nature and once irresistible strength. Drives that interfere with readiness for contest according to tribal and hierarchic instincts may be rejected as weaknesses. Having to live in a world functioning by such rules may make them acceptable as a framework for individual pursuits of happiness. Those who cannot or do not win in such an environment might oppose such an ideology. The less they are privileged in a manipulative system, the more they may be willing to denounce it. As long as individuals have not reached average privileges, this may be their objective. However, most of such individuals may lust for more than reaching the equitable states once they have reached them. Even underprivileged individuals may not wish to foreclose this dimension to their potential. Who would not want to be more highly regarded than others or possess more means? Who would not want to be king or queen? If we are honest, we all have this wish in us. None of us is free from our archaic instincts, even if they are becoming weaker. In a way, one can say that we are lying to ourselves when we claim to be solely interested in equality of rights and when we denounce efforts to gain power over others. If we wish to ever advance beyond such a primitive mindset and fulfill the promise of civilized human existence that we can already grasp, we must acknowledge that we are not yet all we would like to be as human beings. We must understand the continuing primitive failings of us and others, their consequences, how a manipulative system uses them and how we might use them. We must expose such failings when we detect them influencing perceptions, thoughts, emotions, or conduct and overcome them by considering them in the context of a developed, reconciled concept of happiness. Because our tribal and hierarchic instincts continue to induce motivations for superiority over and resulting exploitation of others, our struggle to contain these motivations is ongoing. But dealing with tribal and hierarchic motivations in us alone will not liberate us from mendacity. Such motivations may survive in those aspiring to power long after other individuals have overcome them. Moreover, individual inclinations to use manipulations have a broader motivational basis. Manipulative tactics may be used to reach any kind of objective more effectively or efficiently, and elites are liable to use them in this breadth as well. If they wish to safely wield mental influence in a full range of situations, they are unlikely to foster a culture or legal system in which mendacious manipulations are seriously curbed. They may maintain a front that attacks unsophisticated variants, but leaves the more refined and less detectable tactics they use intact. They may even allow their tactics to become public knowledge and undertake controlled releases to immunize them against opposition by rendering them normal. This gives the powerful a substantial edge. However, the general permissive environment they create for mendacious manipulations may also increase such manipulative activities among their victims. These activities may only be partly inspired by the strategies of the powerful. Much more likely is that they give room to natural inclinations to use lies and subterfuges as shortcuts to fulfill individual needs. Without effective ethical systems that hold perpetrators accountable, the permeation of societies with manipulations has the opposite of their intended effect. It is a corrosive force that counteracts bonds between individuals and renders them suspicious, cynical, and competitive toward one another. Viewed overall, the pall of mendacious manipulations weighs heavily on human happiness. My Philosophy of Happiness book lays out a path to a higher level of existence that addresses the scourge of misrepresentations and other ill-conceived practices. Still, taking steps along this way can be difficult because it requires a commitment to truth. Realizing or even suspecting that one has been and continues to be systematically deceived about virtually everything that was to serve as a foundation of one's existence, particularly by institutions and persons one held above all reproach, is a traumatic experience. Similarly traumatic may be the dropping of defense mechanisms that kept collaborating individuals in self-imposed suspension. Losing such foundations is bound to cause confusion and strong reactions. Some may mentally withdraw even more to maintain the lies imposed on or fabricated by them. To curb the pain arising from insights, they may fight disclosure and those who expose mendacious strategies and their perpetrators. Many more may wish such insights were not true and that they could continue in the world of make-believe in which they were immersed. They may prefer to ignore disclosures of manipulations even after taking full cognizance of them and continue to go along, perhaps thinking that the good they were led to believe could materialize as promised if they continue working for it within the system. Although such a sentiment is based on a dangerous premise of disregarding underlying mendacious forces, it also contains the core procedural strategy to overcome a mendacious system. That strategy can use a wide array of declared ethical principles, rights, structures, and procedures already in place that are to camouflage and support the underlying mode of operations in a manipulatory system. These incompletely functioning tenets of a better system can be more completely asserted and used for their advertised purposes. Manipulative forces would expose their nature by opposing such uses. Hence, There is justified hope that manipulatory systems and with them the underlying exercise of domination can be gradually reformed. Another aspect supporting this hope is that the pervasive and ingrained nature of manipulations and underlying schemes and the clandestine nature of authoring and implementing such schemes make divulging and remediating them gradual undertakings as well. This may be beneficial for several reasons. For one, the task of overcoming a mendacious setting is divided into more manageable parts. Moreover, the populace is not being flustered by one sudden comprehensive disclosure and challenged to replace a mendacious order in one instant. Seeing fundamental parts of one's reality and identity dissolve may call for monumental upheaval that might stand in the way of a smooth transition into a well-organized existence based on actualities and their handling. But if individuals are eased in small increments of disclosure into the reality of manipulation, the exploitatory truths it is meant to conceal, and into devising operations without deceit, change becomes more manageable. Lastly, a gradual rolling back of manipulative schemes gives their authors opportunities to adjust to a world in which their subversive machinations will no longer succeed and to reform themselves accordingly. Such opportunities may significantly reduce their opposition to reformation and assure an orderly handing over of power. In many countries, reformatory processes to eliminate mendacious manipulation are well underway and have booked impressive results. However, such manipulatory schemes have also evolved to adjust to technological possibilities and counteractions. Succeeding in the struggle against them requires comprehensive understanding and neutralization of manipulatory schemes that stand in the way of free consideration and organization. It also requires understanding and exposing the forces behind a manipulatory system, and what tactics they might apply to preserve their power. Finally, it requires an understanding of how the general populace reacts to mendacious manipulations and how individual motivations and operations in application of such practices work. The essential element of succeeding in ousting manipulation and manipulating forces is to not underestimate their resiliency and determination and to not let up to shine the light of disclosure into all the dark places in which they might traditionally hide, newly take refuge, or reassemble. However, like all momentous improvements in humanity, such outward developments must begin by shining the light of insight first individually within us.